Yes guys, welcome back to another Fantasy Football Fix YouTube video. My name is FPL Nacho and in today's video we are looking at the top transfers going into game week 4. I want to look at those Liverpool midfielders, some forwards and importantly some wildcard essentials if you have activated that chip. So as always, if you look forward to today's video, make sure you do drop a like and of course smash that subscribe button. Without further ado, let's get into today's video. So first up, I think we really need to talk about these Liverpool midfielders going into game week 4. Quite a lot of managers out there are probably sat there with 1, 2 or maybe even 3 Liverpool if you did start the season with your bullish thoughts on Liverpool. But in general, I think most managers are sat there with maybe a defender and a midfielder. Myself, I currently have Trent and Diogo Jota. So coming into game week 4, this was always penciled in as a bit of a fixture swing for Liverpool assets, with Nottingham Forest at home, Bournemouth at home, Wolves away, who have actually started the season pretty poorly, and then Crystal Palace away. So the next 4 fixtures for Liverpool are great. Now, before we actually go into the players, we need to mention that, of course, the Champions League is returning. Liverpool will be playing away against AC Milan between Nottingham Forest and Bournemouth. So we need to take that into consideration when we are looking at any player from a Champions League team. And I do think Diaz and Mo Salah will have their minutes managed at some point over the next 4 game weeks. So I think rotation is going to happen regardless. Gakpo can play instead of Diaz. Chiesa can play on the right-hand side instead of Mo Salah. These things will happen at some point. It's an inevitability. So we need to understand which player to go for. Now, if you're on a wild card, first and foremost, let's get that out of the way. I think because you are starting basically from scratch, Mo Salah is the player that you go for. I just don't see a world where you look at these fixtures coming up, you look at Mo Salah and importantly being a captaincy option in game week 5 and not put him in your team. So first and foremost, you cannot go without Mo Salah if you are going on a wild card. In my eyes, you go for Mo Salah and then it's a question of do you go for Salah and Diaz or do you just go for Mo Salah? Now, if you're in a position right now, similar to myself, where you own a Bukayo Saka and you're looking to bring in a Liverpool midfielder, you can go one of 2 ways. You could do the easy downgrade option to a Luis Diaz, which won't require points hits. But for some managers out there, I do think that Saka to Salah will actually incur a points hit. So looking at the underlying numbers for both players, Luis Diaz actually has the higher expected goals at 2.34 compared to Mo Salah's 1.88. But consistent with what we saw last season, Mo Salah continues to be a chance creator for this Liverpool team at 1.48 expected assists to Luis Diaz's 1.09. But the shot volume is still in Mo Salah's favour, but only just. And again, we're only looking at 3 game weeks worth of information here, so we haven't really got enough data to come to clear conclusions right now. But in terms of the underlying numbers, mainly Mo Salah is leading the way, but I do think Luis Diaz is putting up great numbers considering he is 5 million cheaper than that of Mo Salah. So if I was to buy one right now, if you have an easy route to Mo Salah, I do think it is the best option for your FPL teams. I think, as I mentioned, it gives you a captaincy option in game week 5 where Man City play against Arsenal and naturally people have been going for Haaland captaincy. Mo Salah is a brilliant captain pick for the Bournemouth game at home. Now, if you haven't made a transfer already, please do hold off for the Friday press conferences. Both players have been away on international duty, and I do think Arne Slot will give us something in the press conference to give us a bit of a fitness update on all players in the squad, because all it takes is him to come out and say Diaz travelled back with a knock, and all of a sudden it makes the decision very, very clear. So in terms of buying a player this week outside of the wildcard, as I mentioned, if you can get to Mo Salah easily, I do think that is the way to go. However, if you're in a position where you don't have an easy route to Mo Salah, I personally think Luis Diaz is more than capable of matching Mo Salah over this period. The underlying numbers are fantastic. I think his minutes, yes, while they could be rotational, are still going to be starting minutes for us to have enough confidence to go for a Luis Diaz. So if you can afford Mo Salah, I think you go there. He is going to be long-term the better pick. But if you can't go there, I wouldn't stress about it too much. I still think Luis Diaz is a fantastic pick for your team. And the form that he's in right now, I don't see him coming out of this Premier League team anytime soon consistently. So for that reason, if you can't get there, Luis Diaz is an amazing option for your teams still. So next I want to take a look at some of the forwards available in the game, because if you're moving away from a Bukayo Saka, you might need to free up some funds, and we need to understand who the best player to go to is. So the reason why I've brought up Isak, João Pedro and Ollie Watkins is because a lot of managers right now are actually selling Alexander Isak to fund the Mo Salah move. And we need to discuss whether that is actually the right move for your FPL teams, because I think we're getting into a classic situation here where we are getting tempted by the shiny object in Mo Salah, which is absolutely understandable. But I think we're forgetting what a brilliant option Alexander Isak truly is. Now, at 8.5 million, we knew going into the season that he was going to be an elite finisher, penalty taker, and guaranteed minutes. With the injury to Callum Wilson, no European football for Alexander Isak, it looked like a no-brainer for our FPL teams. And 1 goal, 1 assist, and a reminder, in game week 1, they were down to 10 men for 60 minutes. I actually think it's been quite a favourable start for Alexander Isak, but clearly managers have seen enough and are selling him in their thousands. Now, 0.85 XG per 90, during the course of the 3 games, 0.62 expected assists. Decent underlying numbers, and his shot volume is much better than that of João Pedro's and Ollie Watkins. Now, the player that a lot of managers are moving towards is going to be João Pedro, the most bought player going into game week 4. And when we look at the fixtures coming up, I absolutely understand it. Ipswich at home, Nottingham Forest at home in the next 2 are great entry points if you're looking to bring in a Brighton asset. And with João Pedro, yes, he did travel with the international team and he did play 45 minutes in the most recent Brazilian game. I don't think João Pedro is going to be a risk going into this week in terms of the international competition. I do think, however, that they do have attacking options which could be a rotation risk for him. So while I do think he's fatigued, I think Brighton naturally have replacements that can step in for him over the next 4 game weeks. I look at people like Rutter, who was one of their most expensive signings ever. Evan Ferguson back with the Brighton team, and Ciso playing in at number 10. While I do think João Pedro is going to be rotational all of a sudden, I do think that that could happen at times over the next few weeks. Now, of course, they don't have European football, so they need to find minutes for these players in the Premier League. And while I think João Pedro is a brilliant option if you do want to downgrade from Alexander Isak, it would be my number 1 pick. I think selling Alexander Isak is a bit of a knee-jerk move right now for a lot of managers. Wolves away, followed by Fulham away. Man City at home, not ideal in game week 6, but I'm also aware that a lot of managers are wildcarded in game week 6, so you don't really need to worry about him after that point. So for me, just to conclude those 2 players, if you're doing Isak down to João Pedro as a free transfer and then upgrading Saka to Salah, then yes, I can get behind it. But again, wait until the Friday press conferences for an update on João Pedro's fitness and fatigue. But in terms of managers going from Ollie Watkins, I think this is a move that I can get behind. Watkins hasn't been pitching in training in the last 24 hours, and we know he has been carrying a slight niggle. And coming into this weekend, great fixture at home against Everton, followed by Wolves at home. However, we have the Champions League that we need to take into account with Aston Villa coming between game weeks 4 and 5. And I do think if you're in a position right now of Ollie Watkins, it is a case of you don't sell unless we get confirmation that he is actually injured, but you also don't buy him. It's a very simple situation with Ollie Watkins. So to conclude with the forwards, I think Alexander Isak is a keep unless you are looking to downgrade him to Isak to then afford a Mo Salah. And even then, I would urge you to just consider it, because I think Isak is going to be one of those players that will continue to tick over nicely as a forward. And I do think he can easily get returns in game week 4. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Have you already sold these players going into the weekend? So next up, I want to take a look at some Game Week 4 Wildcard Essentials that I would go for going into this weekend. Now, it's worth noting, there are lots of players to choose from and lots of different strategies that we can go for. But I thought there were a couple of players that I think are just easy locks for our team if we were to do so. So we've already touched on Mo Salah. I think if you're wildcarding in Game Week 4, it's almost impossible to go without him. I think Jota, I think Diaz pose rotation risk with Gakpo and Darwin Núñez. I think Mo Salah's spot, even though he is aging in comparison to the other players, is still going to be pretty locked in this Liverpool team. So if you're wildcarding right now, I wouldn't overthink it. I would go for Mo Salah and spoiler alert, I would also go for Erling Haaland. I think that's a player that I would find it very, very difficult to go without. So I personally would go for the premium option of Mo Salah and Erling Haaland. Now, in terms of the rest of the options, again, with the Liverpool fixtures coming up, very hard to look past Trent Alexander-Arnold. I do think Robertson has given us great value, 1 million cheaper, but I think if you're wildcarding right now, Trent is just one of those players that has that magic touch in the game, I'm going to be honest. And I think if someone is going to get a double-digit return over the next few weeks, it is going to be Trent Alexander-Arnold. Now, I get it. Conor Bradley is taking some minutes, and we can be cautious of that. But I still think if you're wildcarding right now, Trent is a player that you do need in your teams. Now, in terms of some budget enablers that we can go towards, I really do like Eze. I've seen a lot of managers going for Mbeumo, which I do get behind. But what I like about Eze is it gives you that price point that if you don't want to have Mbeumo for the next couple of weeks with tricky games, you can go to Eze with that brilliant home game against Leicester. And then if you don't think he is a long-term pick for your teams, you can easily use him as a bit of a cash cow to then go to Bryan Mbeumo in game week 6 when the fixtures start to swing. But for game week 4 at home against Leicester, I think it's very difficult to look past Eze. And also João Pedro, we spoke about him. I don't think he's necessarily a desperate transfer for people's teams. However, if I was wildcarding this week, I think he's offering too much value right now at his price point to ignore. So I do think if I was buying fresh on a wildcard, he would be in that team. But as you can see, I think there are really great players out there that you can go for. So there's only a few players that I would deem quote-unquote essential. And even then, I think there are some great options like a Calvert-Lewin if you want to go for an Everton forward longer term. I think there's some great cheap enablers in Morgan Rogers and Semenyo, again, long-term picks for your side. So I don't think there is a clear wildcard 4 team, but I do think if I was building it, I would make these players the core of it and then sprinkle other players around it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The big thing for a wildcard 4 is how you're going to get to Arsenal players in game week 6. So last up, I thought it would be really important here to take a look at the predicted points for game week 4 to get an understanding of which players this week are great to own and maybe also some captaincy picks. So top of the table is going to be Mo Salah with 8 predicted points, and kind of back in the narrative that if you are going to go for a Liverpool midfielder and you can afford him, he is the route to go for. And we know in game week 5, he is going to be clearly the standout option. So if he's looking good on the algorithm in game week 4, then I think for the next 2 game weeks, he is one of the best picks in the game, full stop. Erling Haaland, 7.6, great underlying numbers. We know that he can bag a hat-trick in any fixture. And if you don't have Mo Salah, this is an easy captaincy pick for your teams. Eze as well. Really, really great underlying numbers, even though the FPL points haven't been there prior to game week 3. 6.5, I think he's a great differential captain, but can anyone really be brave enough to go there outside of Salah and Haaland? I probably doubt it. So I think Eze is just a great player to own in general in your teams. And De Bruyne looking actually great, 5.8 predicted points. Not a player that I think a lot of managers are going towards unless they're wildcarding. And I do think with someone like a De Bruyne, it's a very difficult player to buy, especially when you have other options at cheaper prices available. But if you want to go differential for a 1-week punt, I do not mind Kevin De Bruyne at all. Rest of the players, Diaz and Jota at 5.4 and 5.3. Again, if I had to pick one, it probably would just be Luis Diaz. I think his numbers are slightly better than that of Diogo Jota's. And I think his minutes might be a little bit better. And then finishing up the table, we have Trent, Watkins, Saka and Kai Havertz. I wouldn't be looking to buy Arsenal assets now, but Arsenal are a very interesting topic where injuries to Odegaard and suspension to Rice mean going into game week 4, a lot of managers are not really bullish on Arsenal and are selling someone like a Bukayo Saka. But I think Saka, if you can keep him, might actually be a bit of a shrewd hold going into the weekend against a Spurs team that always give you chances. But let me know in the comment section who is your captain going to be for game week 4. And that's going to wrap up today's video. Really hope that it's provided some value. We've deep dived into the top transfers and the wildcard essentials. But if you have any questions, please do put them in the comment section. We'll be sure to get them as soon as possible. Have an amazing day. Make sure you do drop a like and smash the subscribe button. And I'll see you real soon. Take care. Cheers.